Good evening. Our next speaker, Linda Moulton Howe, is a graduate of Stanford University with a master's degree in communication. She has devoted her documentary film, television, radio, writing, and reporting career to productions concerning science, medicine, and the environment. Ms. Howe has received local, national, and international awards, including 3 regional Emmys, a national Emmy nomination, and a Station Peabody Award for her programming. Linda's documentaries have included Poison in the Wind and A Sun-Kissed Poison, which compared smog pollution in Los Angeles and Denver, Fire in the Water, about hydrogen as an alternate energy source to fossil fuels, A Radioactive Water, about uranium contamination in public drinking water in Denver suburbs, and many more very popular documentaries. Linda also produces a very high traffic and popular site called earthfiles.com, also the recipient of multiple internet web awards. So let me not waste any more time and welcome Linda Moulton Howe to the stage.
Thank you, John. Well, first, thanks Clifford Cliff and MUFON for inviting John Burroughs and me to this Denver MUFON gathering. I know that it was about 5 years ago that I was presenting to you new information that I had about the policy of denial in the interest of national security that had come to me also through military sources and Andy Kistner, who had been a representative in the state of New Mexico, and it was breaking new ground about the fact that there was a policy of denial that was affecting everyone from White Sands to Wright-Patterson to around the world in association with American military. And tonight, what I'm going to do is be presenting to you for, really, this will be the first audience to hear some of the testimony that I'm going to be presenting from a Staff Sergeant, Monroe Nevels, who just in the last month or two has talked to me on the record in an interview about being the disaster preparedness technician in Rendlesham Forest on the December 28th, 1980 night when Colonel Halt, the deputy base commander, was in the forest with what Colonel Halt estimates were at least 30 people serving in the U.S. Air Force on December 28th. And what Monroe Nevels was told about a top secret investigation ordered by the base commander, not by Colonel Halt. And that in fact, Colonel Halt was left out of the decisions that were being made by the base commander at RAF Bentwaters after December 26th, 1980, when, as I was told back in 1984 with Chuck DeCaro from CNN, there was one of those airmen at RAF Bentwaters that either jumped up on the craft that was in the forest or was taken up in a beam of light. And throughout these past 30 years, the one name associated with that airman is John Burroughs. And you will get to hear from him in his own words in a while. But first, what I'd like to do is to set the stage for exactly where was the famous RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge base. The location of these dramatic military events is northeast of London in Suffolk County near Ipswich, where the coast faces the North Sea. 30 years ago in 1980, that's where the joint American and British RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge Air Base was surrounded by Rendlesham Forest. Historically, in 1942, the British Royal Air Force constructed an air base near Woodbridge between Butley and Tunstall, which is the large pink circle near the top of the map, and they called it then RAF Butley, B-U-T-L-E-Y. That's on the northeastern edge of Rendlesham Forest. And during World War II, more trees were planted at the request of military forces to enlarge Rendlesham Forest near the air bases to help cover up these military activities that were so important to the war. Straight east, about 6 miles on the North Sea, is the Orford Ness Lighthouse that you probably have heard so much about, and I can guarantee you has absolutely nothing to do with what happened in that forest. To the south was the RAF Bodsey Chain Home Radar Station. That's the bottom pink circle on the map. And that, during World War II, monitored the launch of V-2 rockets from Germany. Although there was no defense against the German V-2 rockets, RAF Bodsey was able to provide the British Bomber Command with the location of the German V-2 launch sites, which could then be attacked. And east of Butley at Orford Ness, that far right pink circle, an experimental Madre over-the-horizon radar station was constructed in 1961 to monitor Soviet launches. All this adds up to that between Butley, Woodbridge, Orford Ness, and down at Bodsey, for many years prior to 1980, it played a pivotal role in Europe with what the United States and England were doing during World War II and after. After the war ended, RAF Butley was renamed RAF Bentwaters by Britain's Ministry of Defense and leased to the United States Air Force for its 81st Fighter Interceptor Wing and the 67th Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Squadron. By 1958, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge became a joint U.S. Air Force and Royal Air Force complex with that big, thick Rendlesham Forest in between. After the Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Cold War thawed, the United States canceled its involvement with RAF Bentwaters in 1992. Now it is a privately owned business park, while RAF Woodbridge is used by the UK Ministry of Defence for Army training exercises. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on highly strange events that took place over 72 hours from approximately midnight of Christmas night into the early morning hours of December 26th and onward to sunup on December 28, 1980. And this Google aerial shows the Woodbridge weapons storage area in the lower left near the Woodbridge airfield bordered by the dark green Rendlesham Forest. At the far eastern end of the Woodbridge flight line is the East Gate, and beyond the gate is a British civilian's farmhouse called the Foley House. The orange path marks the roads that Staff Sergeant James Peniston said that he traveled in a security pickup with Airman First Class John Burroughs and Airman Ed Kavansak to investigate strange unidentified aerial lights after midnight on December 26th. And for you as an audience, I would like to stress something that I've become aware of, that certainly in the United States, we think of a day as the sun comes up and we go to work and there's one night after we get home. The truth is, there are 2 nights and a day in every 24 hours. From midnight to midnight, when the clock hand switches midnight going toward 1, it is night. When the sun comes up, that is the day of that first night. When the sun goes down, it is the second night in that 24-hour period. This is very important to keep in mind in studying, reading about, or listening about RAF Bentwaters, because many people over the years would say, because they went to work at 11 p.m. on December 27th, that what happened was on the 27th when it's after midnight on the 28th. So we're talking with Peniston and Burroughs about a 3 a.m. event on December 26th, 3 hours after Christmas night shifted. And the orange dot near the farmhouse field in this map is where Sergeant Peniston says that he and Airman Burroughs approached bright lights, and from Peniston's point of view, a black, glassy surface, triangle-shaped craft, entirely different from what you're going to see in a computer illustration from John Burroughs in a few minutes. Between the Foley House and the farmhouse is the section of Rendlesham Forest where the mysterious lights, beams, and the craft phenomena occurred between December 26th and 28th, 1980. And at the conclusion, I'm going to share with you what happened 12 days later, on January 9th, 1981, that in its own way was equally dramatic for two airmen, and it provoked Colonel Halt, Colonel Ted Conrad, and then Colonel Gordon Williams, the 81st Tactical Wing Commander, who became a general a month later, to all three hurry out into Rendlesham Forest because more UFOs had returned. And we'll get to that later. About 4 miles north was the RAF Bentwaters weapons storage area that did have nuclear weapons. It was top secret at the time. It is acknowledged by everyone today. Those nuke bunkers along Hot Row were watched 24 hours a day by security from the Bentwaters WSA watchtower. This photograph from the now historic RAF Bentwaters Tower looking out over the nuclear weapons storage area was taken in 2007 by UK police officer Gary Heseltine. What I have come to better understand in talking with all of these men and a woman who was there is how many highly strange aerial light phenomena were being seen by various people in different parts of the large airbase. But sightings were often never reported. If reports were made, they were often known only to the people involved. As RAF Bentwaters Airman First Class Doc Rhodes told me a few months ago, quote, "When I got to Bentwaters fresh from basic in January of 1980, which would be about 12 months before the dramatic events, so now he's there in January of 1980, I was told by some of the more experienced guys, quote, if you see a light or something strange floating in the skies here, don't report it. You'll only make trouble for yourself," close quote. And in fact, Doc Rhodes sketched for me what he remembered seeing at the beginning of 1980 when he was stationed at the Woodbridge main gate one night. He said a very large, bright aerial light stopped in the air very close to where he was at the Woodbridge main gate. He could not hear any sound, and watched this light shoot a series of beams down toward the flight line where the Woodbridge weapons storage area was. That did not have nuclear weapons, but it was a weapons storage area. And Doc Rhodes told me this to emphasize that as early as January 1980, something unidentified with the ability to send beams down, just like we're going to hear, happened in December in 1980, a year later. The beams were going down into that weapons storage area at Woodbridge. But Doc Rhodes told me that he never once reported that incredible aerial light and the beams because of the warning not to stir up trouble. Airman First Class Doc Rhodes was in Delta or D flight at RAF Bentwaters. There were Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta flights for law enforcement and security. Security would patrol base perimeters and flight line operations, while law enforcement would check buildings, deal with domestic disputes, and check people in and out of gates. And back in late December 1980, nearly a year after Airman Rhodes watched the big light emit the beams down into the Woodbridge flight line, military, security, and law enforcement from C and D flights were involved in at least 3 consecutive nights. All 3 nights involved mysterious, unidentified lights, beams, and craft. And one of those airmen from C Flight law enforcement was John Burroughs, said by some eyewitnesses there at the base to have either jumped up on a craft in the forest or to have risen up in a beam of light. John's conscious memory has been blocked for 30 years about what happened to him on 2 different nights around 3 a.m. on December 26th and around 4 a.m. on December 28th, 1980. But in both of those nights, he can remember his approaching the lights. And on the second night, he's even running toward them. John himself wanted to know the truth about the rumors that he had either jumped up on this craft in Rendlesham Forest or had been lifted into a beam of light. Burroughs himself was confused by that rumor because he could not remember what happened when he was near those lights on either the early morning. And the one night on December 26th, when he was with Sergeant Jim Peniston, and then on the second, which was the 28th, he was with another Sergeant, Adrian Bustinza. And I'm now going to share brief excerpts from a private November 11th, 1988 hypnosis session with John Burroughs that was never made public before John and I started working on this presentation and the evolving presentation this year. And it was done in conjunction with a Hollywood TV producer named Kurt Brubaker, who learned about the Burroughs abduction rumors while he was producing UFO Cover-Up Live, broadcast earlier in 1988. Some in this room may have seen that back in 1988. Brubaker approached John Burroughs to try to learn the truth, he said, but not for any TV broadcast. John had first seen the strange lights near the East Gate with Staff Sergeant Bud Steffens, his law enforcement supervisor. John went into Rendlesham Forest with yet another law enforcement Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston and a new airman, Ed Kavansak. The videotape that you're going to see in here is deteriorated. This is made from the original 1988 tape. But you can clearly hear Burroughs in his hypnotic state, the first hypnosis that he had ever done, talk rapidly about walking next to Staff Sergeant Peniston on December 26th as they approach unidentified area lights in the trees.
We started getting nervous. We were like going, what are we getting into? I don't know. What's going on? We don't know. The radio keeps coming back. They can't reach us for a while. We can't reach them. We're getting real nervous. We're getting scared. We can't get on the radio. We can't go much farther if they don't hear us on the radio no more because we don't like what's going on. Sergeant Peniston, what do you think? I don't know. Stop right now. Stop right now. Let's try to reach him on the radio. Okay, we've got him. Yeah, it's still there. It seems to be in the clearing. It seems to be in that clearing up ahead. Can we go far and farther? Yes, go on farther. Find out what's going on. Let's go, guys. Look at that. There it is. Hit the ground. I run. I died. Shoot, John, shoot. I can't. I don't have my gun.
Who's telling you to shoot?
Sergeant Peniston. I don't have my gun. They told me not to bring it. Yes, they did. They told you at the last minute to bring it.
Describe what it is he wants you to shoot at.
Lights. A weird oval-shaped light. It's hovering. It's strobing.
Flashing back and forth, flashing on and off.
It's white, but there's lights below it. There's little lights below it. There's the orange lights. There's the red lights. It's like sun. It's like the sun, but it's not shaped like the sun. It's like an oval-shaped thing, and it's pulsating.
How far away is it?
10 feet, maybe 15.
How big is it?
I don't know. It keeps changing.
Changing its size.
The lights are pulsating. It's hard to judge. It's there now. It's moving back.
Away from you?
It's moving away. It's up in the air. It's moving back. It's up through the trees. It's moving back. Now it's in the distance, but it's there. It's down low again. How did it get through the trees? I don't know. Well, we'll follow it. Call him. Tell him we're going to follow it. We got to follow it. I can't reach him on the radio. The hell with the radio. Put it down. We don't need it. Put it in your pocket. Let's go. We don't care what they say. We've got to find out. Something's there. We've got to find out. Let's go. Spread out more. Okay, let's go. Okay, move. Okay, be careful. I feel weird. I feel tingly. I feel tingly. We all feel tingly. We all got to know. We got to know. We got to know. Is it a UFO, John? I don't know. I don't know. What is the UFO? What is it? I don't know. It's not real. It's lights. It's not an object. It does not appear to be a solid, total object. It just appears like it could be an object because it gives the impression of an object, but it's mostly lights. It's all lights. It seems like lights to me.
A shape made of light.
Yes, a shape made of lights. It's getting smaller. It's small. Look how small it got. Look how small it is. I don't believe it. Look how small it is. It's just there though. It's like it's calling to us to come to it. We've got to go to it. It's telling us to come to it. We can feel it. Yes, can you feel it? Yes, I can feel it. We've got to get to it. We've got to get to it. We've got to know what it wants. It wants us. It wants us. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Spread out. We're getting into some more woods again. How could it move? How could it move through the woods? How could it move through the woods like that? There's no way. There is no way nothing can move through the woods like that. There is absolutely no way. There's no trees being knocked out. There's no trees being knocked down, but it's in the woods. Look at this. It's in the woods. It's moving up and down. Look at this. Sergeant Pennison, should we keep going? Yes, we should. I agree. I agree. Are you okay over there? Yeah, I'm fine, but this is weird. I know it's weird. I've never seen anything like this. Look around. Can you see any other crafts? Can you see anything else? Can you see somebody that might be out here doing this to us? Can you see anybody? No, it's quiet. It's all quiet now. There's nothing there but this thing. It's pulsating. There's red lights. There's blue lights. There's orange lights. It's there. It's small though. It's real small. It's small. Keep going. Keep going. We can hear humming now. We can hear humming now. The ground's shaking. The ground's shaking. This is weird. This is weird. Why didn't we bring our guns? Why didn't we bring our guns? Could it be drawing into us? I feel like I'm being pulled. Something's pulling me. Oh God. Sergeant Pennison, what's going on? I don't know. It's pulling it towards us. It's pulling it towards us. Oh look, it just changed again. It's small. It's small. It's small. It's small. Now it's moving back. Now it's moving back. Now it's moving back. Now it's moving back. Look. It just look how fast it moved back. Look, it's a quarter mile back now. It's a quarter mile back now. Let's start running. We can't let it get away from us. We've got to know where it is. Okay, well, it's gone. Okay, security control, return to base, return to base, return to base. ETA back, I don't know. 30 minutes, hour, unknown. Okay, keeping radio contact. Okay, and we just start walking back. And I'm talking to him.
Who's going with you?
I'm talking. Sergeant Pennison and I and Banachek. We're walking. Now we're walking back. Okay, what was it? I don't know. John, what do you think it is? I don't know. Do I look scared? You look pale. I don't know what I saw, John. I think it was a UFO. I don't know. I don't want to believe what I saw. He goes, you know, John, it seemed like we were there and all of a sudden we're here. Why couldn't we get radio contact with them? We should have been able to. There was repeater stations, there was towers, but we lost contact with them. I don't know. Well, what are we going to do? I don't know. Let's just see what happens when we get back. So we're walking and it's cold and we're walking and we come across a creek that we don't even remember crossing. Do you remember this, John? No, I don't remember this. Do you remember that, John? No, I don't remember that. Well, how did we get there? I don't know. Could we have been moved by it? Could something have picked us off the ground? I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. Okay, let's get back. Okay, now the radio transmissions are getting strong now. Real strong. Okay, we're talking real clearly with them, and they're saying, what's your ETA? We don't know. The British police are there. The shift commander's there. The flight chief for security flight chief's there. Our flight chief's there. There's other law enforcement patrols there. Everybody was concerned. They go, we lost contact with you for 45 minutes, 50 minutes. We didn't know where you were. We saw, the WSA tower saw all kinds of lights in the air. They thought they saw something being beamed up in the air, but they weren't sure. They thought, we lost you, John. We thought we lost you guys. Well, what happened? We don't know. I had a feeling of disbelief. I didn't know what happened. I wanted to make sure in my mind that there had to be physical proof out there where the site was to make me believe what I saw. So I went out there with the rest of them, And when we got there was the Sergeant Gulius, a Captain Verano, and some other guys out there that I don't know who they were. And we were asked to show what happened. And we went out kind of in the area where we first found this thing. And God darn it, there were tripods. There were 3 evenly spaced impressions in the ground. Right where we saw this light. And I'm like, holy Jesus. And we're all looking at each other and we're going, maybe we were not weirdos. Maybe something really did happen out there. So then we went and there were tree limbs down. There was fresh tree limbs down. And there was some damage to the trees. And by then I'm like going, oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to myself. And Sergeant Tennyson, something had happened. Oh God, I wish we could have recorded this. I wish we would have had more than just what we were there. I do too, John. We just experienced something probably that a lot of people never have and never will.
We probably experienced something that a lot of people never have and never will is, I think, an understatement. I have interviewed for Earth Files and Coast to Coast Radio another airman named Richard Bertolino. Some of you may have heard that. And he was listening on a radio channel with another senior airman as John Burroughs, Jim Penniston, and Kvansak went into the forest. And for a while, he could hear the voices. He could hear Penniston and Central Security Control and the interaction. And suddenly, he said all of the 3 radio channels that he was aware of, they all went to static for approximately 45 minutes. And Central Security Control could not reach them. Jim Penniston also told me in an interview that he did not know where John Burroughs was at one point in the forest. John had been close to him. He estimated at least 10 or 15 feet. And Jim is doing work around this craft that you will hear more about from Jim Penniston. But his question is all of our questions, including John's own question. Where was John Burroughs at the time of the radio static where there was no communication, and Jim Penniston having the question, what happened to John? So after all of this, John and Jim Penniston, in the morning, the sun is now up, they returned to their RAF Bentwater Sea Flight Shift Commander, Lieutenant Fred Moran, who asked them to describe what happened. Airman Burroughs also submitted to Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt a handwritten statement dated January 2nd, 1981, along with a sketch of what he saw. But at that point, that is the only interaction that they had with Colonel Halt. Colonel Halt was not doing anything aggressively. He received the report. Lieutenant Fred Moran took the report and asked them to do notes and drawings. Here is the actual handwritten statement from John Burroughs that was made on January 2nd, 1981, just a few days after the 28th. Quote, "The lights were red and blue, the red one above the blue one, and they were flashing on and off. Because I never saw anything like that coming from the woods before, we, and at that point it was Burroughs and Steffens first, decided to drive down and see what it was. We went down Eastgate Road and took a right at the stop sign and drove down about 10 to 20 yards to where there is a logging road that goes into the forest. At the road, I could see a white light shining onto the trees, and I could still see the red and blue lights. This would move back and forth, up and down, but the blue and white and orange would come out when it was sitting in one place. Blue lights would come out of the beam and the white light below. Blue lights would blink on and off inside the beam, plus the beam would be red and orange. A white light would come out below the beam in the trees. Signed, Airman First Class John Burroughs, 81st Security Police Squadron, Security Police Operations, Charlie Flight." Burroughs and Penniston also described feeling hair on their arms and back of their necks stand up like a thunderstorm's electrostatic atmosphere, but it was a clear, cold December night, no storms. According to Sergeant Penniston's notebook, shown here in his official written report, he and Airman John Burroughs got close to a highly strange craft on the ground, but Jim Penniston's perspective is completely different than the John Burroughs original sketch that was definitely drawn and submitted and was given to 2 senior officers on January 2nd, 1981. That stands as a solid brick in this entire RAF Bantwaters history, including the statement made by Lieutenant Fred Moran, who was the shift commander. Those stand with dates on them. They were written and typed up and written and drawn on January 2nd, 1981, about a 3 a.m. event on December 26th, so that's locked in. But Penniston sketched this and said, quote, "Triangular in shape, the top portion is producing mainly white light, which encompasses most of the upper section of the craft. A small amount of white light is appearing from what appears to be the bottom of the craft. At the left side is a bluish light, and on the other side is red light. The light seemed to be molded as part of the exterior of the structure that seemed to be landed on the forest floor," close quote. And John Burroughs, to this day, does not remember seeing Jim Penniston near such a craft. But Burroughs also knows his mind is blocked whenever he tries to think of the lights in Rendlesham Forest. John Burroughs also does not remember Sergeant Penniston having a camera, but Penniston says that he took 36 photographs on 35mm black and white film and sketched symbols in his notebook that were engraved into the craft's shiny black glassy surface. Whatever the reason for the differently described craft, this computer graphic produced by John Burroughs with UK researcher John Rackham of what Burroughs remembers seeing in the forest with Sergeant Penniston and Ed Kvansak is not a crashing airplane, it is definitely not the planet Mars, and it is definitely not the Orford Ness Lighthouse. What we do know for certain is that Sea Flight Shift Commander Lieutenant Fred Moran talked to Staff Sergeant James Penniston, Airman First Class John Burroughs, and Airman Ed Kvansak after the Sea Flight shift was over at 7 a.m. on December 26, 1980. Lieutenant Moran typed up the following report, quote, "At approximately 0300 hours, 26 December 1980, I was on duty at Building 679, Central Security Control, when I was notified that Airman First Class Burroughs had sighted some strange lights in the wooded area east of the runway at RAF Woodbridge. Shortly after this initial report, Airman First Class Burroughs was joined by Staff Sergeant Penniston and his rider, Airman Kvansak. Staff Sergeant Penniston also reported the strange lights. I directed Staff Sergeant Coffey, the on-duty security controller, to attempt to ascertain from Sergeant Penniston whether or not the lights could be marker lights of some kind, to which Sergeant Penniston said that he had never seen lights of this color or nature in the area before. He described them as red, blue, white, and orange. And what I'm going to do is compress this for the sake of time and jump to a paragraph in which he says, Staff Sergeant Penniston stated that the object on the forest floor was, quote, a definite mechanical object. Due to the colors they had reported, I alerted them to the fact that they might have been approaching a light aircraft crash scene. But Sergeant Penniston reported getting near the object and then all of a sudden said they had gone past it and were looking at a marker beacon that was in the same general direction as the other lights. Penniston replied that he had seen the other lights and that what the difference was between marker lights and what they were dealing with in the forest was a dramatic difference. They continued to look further to no avail. At approximately 03:54 hours, Lieutenant Moran terminated the investigation and ordered all units back to their normal duties. He says, I directed Sergeant Peniston to take notes of the incident when he came in that morning. After talking with him face to face concerning the incident, I am convinced that he saw something out of the realm of explanation for him at that time. I would like to state that Sergeant Peniston is a totally reliable and mature individual. He was not overly excited, nor do I think he is subject to overreaction or misinterpretation of circumstances. And then he says, later that morning, after conversing with Captain Mike Verano, the day shift commander, I discovered that there had been several other sightings, which I have been able to talk with many other people about. I'm going to be sharing tonight, in the interest of time, only a couple, but there are many, many light activities over this 72 hours. Now, so we've set the scene a little bit about what happened in the forest from 3 a.m. to unknown time, and the very solid, typed up reports, the handwritten reports and the illustrations 20 hours later. So now we're moving 20 hours into the future, while John Burroughs and Jim Peniston's Charlie flight went off duty at 11 p.m. on December 26, 1980. Delta Flight was gathering to get their guns in the nightly procedure known as guard mount. One of the new enlistees, who had only arrived at RAF Bentwaters 2 months before in October 1980, was Lori Bowen, 18 years old, second from the right in the middle row of this D-Flight drill team photograph. Lori grew up in Fridley, Minnesota, and immediately after high school enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. Like all new basic airmen, she was assigned to gate security. Christmas night, December 25, 1980, she had been at the Woodbridge main gate and remembers Base Commander Ted Conrad bringing Christmas dinner to her and others working the holiday swing shift. The next night, because she was a basic airman and not given the privilege of driving her own vehicle, Lori Bowen was driven from the D-Flight guard mount and dropped off for a midnight shift at the East Gate near Woodbridge. Now, this was not a normal procedure. Usually, only swing shifts who were on swing shift worked the remote East Gate, and they left the guard shack around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. This was what was normal. But the explanation for putting this new 18-year-old airman, Lori Bowen, on the remote East Gate for the night of December 26th D-Flight midnight shift might have been because now we know that the base commander, Colonel Ted Conrad, as soon apparently as he learned about what happened at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 26th, set in motion a top secret investigation. Colonel Halt was not in that investigation, and no one was told about anything that had happened to Peniston, Burroughs, and Kovansack, except a very tiny group of people there at the base and perhaps up the chain of command to Ramstein. So Colonel Conrad would have wanted more eyes and ears at the East Gate. He knows what he wants to investigate. He knows what he has heard about 3 a.m. the 26th, but no one else does, and certainly not Lori Bowen. And sure enough, this is what Lori saw looking north above the forest. She's an artist and drew this illustration of the small wooden East Gate guard shack where she watched a large reddish-orange ball of fiery light descend slowly into Rendlesham Forest and disappear.
If you took 3 handfuls of colored fire and put them together, and you saw one color, then you saw another color, then you saw another color, you get this feeling that it's not blinking, but that it's turning. And then this was in front of me on the other side of the runway in the woods. There's nothing but darkness from the trees. It just slowly disappeared.
It went down from high on an angle into the trees.
Right, just straight down into the horizon where the dark trees were. you could tell it was big, even though it's like looking at the moon. Is the moon big? You knew it was big because you could see it. You know, you knew it was off at a distance, and you're thinking, it's just like nothing else you've ever seen. Mm-hmm. You can't even compare it to something because there's nothing to compare it to.
Lori, what was the first thing that you did after seeing this bright orange light disappear into the forest?
I remember watching it, and then I remember the metal phone inside of that little wooden guard shack. You have to open up the metal lid on the wall. And I remember lifting it up and calling the desk sergeant saying, some big ball of fire or whatever. Somebody's going to come down to the east gate. I don't want to be down here by myself. I just saw this huge ball of light just disappear into the forest. And then next thing I remember is Trementosi being there. He would have been Police 5. He came to my gate, and I remember we sat there listening to the radio, which is Motorola, as Lieutenant Tamplin, Bonnie Tamplin, talking to Sergeant Robert Ball, and I just remember the fear in her voice and her saying, Bob, where are you? I can't see anything. And she was scared to death, and she was just, Bob, where are you? I can't see anything. And she was just so scared, and this was our lieutenant. And rumors that it was just a Orford lighthouse, which was ridiculous. Like I said, I lived in Orford at the time. And then they said it was Mars. What, do they think we're stupid? You know, obviously it was to shut us up and to cover it all up.
So Lori's sighting was north of the base, not east. The Orford Lighthouse is straight east. The light activity in many of these incidents are taking place to the north. Other people also saw different lights that night, including John Trementosi and Police 5 law enforcement, along with 4 others. The 5 men watched colored lights in the sky, and they actually argued about whether the British were celebrating New Year's Eve early. Here is John Trementosi.
We were doing security checks on the flight line, and we noticed lights in the sky.
And what colors were you seeing in the sky, and what patterns?
The lights were red, green, and white. We notified the control tower. And what we seen was the lights were not blinking. There were just 3 steady lights. And they'd be in one spot, and then it would disappear, go to another spot, appear again, go to another spot, appear. And it wouldn't be any certain pattern that it would show up in. And no noise. And it wasn't stars. Mm-hmm. The white light wasn't flashing like it was a plane, and it was very weird. It was very weird. Matter of fact, we watched that probably for a good hour and a half.
So from somewhere around 2 to 3:30 a.m.?
Right. It was after Christmas, and one of the things we were wondering while we were watching this, if England had a different New Year's than the Americans, because it was right around that time, which we ruled out after because it was just too strange.
Do you know any of the men who were with you that night that Colonel Halt was called?
I know the woman at the gate check was Lori Bowen. We notified our desk sergeant, who in turn notifies the sergeant on duty, the shift leader. And then security came out, the colonels were notified, Colonel Holt.
Meanwhile, after midnight on December 27th, 1980, John Burroughs woke up agitated, thinking about what he and Jim Penniston had encountered in the forest, and he felt that the lights were back. Even though he was off duty, John went back to Bentwater's Desk Sergeant O'Brien to ask what was happening, and learned that D-Flight Shift Commander Lieutenant Bonnie Tamplin had been relieved of her duty because a light entered her vehicle in the forest, causing Lieutenant Tamplin to panic and cry, literally, during her radio communication. The assumption is that Lieutenant Tamplin had gone into Rendlesham Forest with D-Flight Master Sergeant Robert Ball to investigate Lori Bowen's fiery sphere report. And what no one has known until now is that Saturday afternoon at 4 p.m. on December 27th, Staff Sergeant Monroe Nevels, a disaster preparedness technician at RAF Bentwaters and a former Marine, had a surprise visit from Lieutenant Bruce England, the shift commander for Bravo Flight. Both Sergeant Nevels and Lieutenant England had served in the Marines before re-enlisting in the U.S. Air Force. Lieutenant England told Sergeant Nevels he was there on top secret orders of the RAF Bentwaters Base Commander, Colonel Ted Conrad. This testimony to me in a recently recorded interview is the first time in 30 years that Staff Sergeant Monroe Nevels has gone on the record about the top secret investigation provoked because, quote, an airman was taken.
Lieutenant England told me that one of the airmen had been taken aboard the spacecraft.
And he was talking about what had happened at least 2 nights earlier. Can you talk about that?
Yes, he just basically went through and told me about Sergeant Jim Penniston and John Burroughs were involved. I do remember the names were mentioned, and he said even to the point that someone had been abducted into the aircraft. And he said the reason Colonel Conrad has asked for me to come get you is because he felt that if he wanted an honest answer from anybody, then you would give it to him. So it's my orders. They are down at the Woodbridge Officers Club, and they are having a party down there. And when we get through on our investigation, he'll be waiting for us, and we're to go back and you report to him what you saw.
Lieutenant England knew exactly where to take Staff Sergeant Nevels that night to see 3 depressions in the forest soil that had a triangular pattern like a tripod. The 2 men also watched a bright light in the trees. Sergeant Nevels looked through night vision goggles and said there was a bright light with a dark center that reminded him of a human eye and pupil that blinked on and off. He and Lieutenant England left the forest at around 8 p.m. and reported to Colonel Conrad at the Woodbridge Officers Club Christmas party. Quote, the situation merits more investigation, unquote, Sergeant Nevels told Colonel Conrad. Also at the Christmas party was Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. It was at the Christmas party that Colonel Conrad, for the first time, turned further investigation over to the Deputy Base Commander, Colonel Charles Halt. So Colonel Halt, Lieutenant Bruce England, Staff Sergeant Monroe Nevels, Staff Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, and several security police were organized into a search party with pickup trucks and light-alls. Sergeant Nevels also took his AN/PDR 27F Geiger counter that measures both beta and gamma radiation. Sergeant Nevels used the Geiger counter on the tripod depressions and burn marks at the same height on all the trees that grew in a circle around the tripod depressions. Sergeant Nevels did not get any beta readings, but he did get an average of 7 milliroentgens of gamma radiation. An hour exposure of 7 milliroentgens of gamma is equivalent to about 1/3 of a chest x-ray, so not exceedingly high. But what else, in terms of field and energy, was out in that forest where these men were that might also have been there and affected them? I asked a radiation physicist in the Texas Department of State Health Services what bright light source could give off ionizing gamma radiation. And this is a direct quote. There is nothing that I know about that would give off intense light and fly in the air and emit gamma radiation. Nothing that I have ever encountered in my 40 years of radiation physics work, close quote. And then he went into the background of half-lives on things like cobalt-60 that can be 30 years or 5 years, but would not be glowing, would not be flying, would not be zipping around in the forest. Now I want to play for you a brief excerpt from what happened that night. This is from Colonel Halt's 18-minute audio tape recorded at different times there were 7 hours. They were out there for 7 full hours. This is only an 18-minute original audio tape. He's turning on and turning off, turning on, turning off, because as he told John and me and Monroe Nevels back then, he didn't know how much audio tape that he had on what was then a magnetic audio cassette tape. So he was turning it on when they wanted to say something about radiation readings or lights or beams, and then he would shut it off. And the voices that you hear on this segment are mostly Colonel Halt and Staff Sergeant Monroe Nevels.
We are again transmitting an indication of a heat source coming out of that center spot. Some form of energy. Directly overhead, one can see an opening in the trees, broken pine branches on the ground. You saw a light. Where? Straight ahead. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. It's a strange, small red light. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees. Is it back again? Yes, sir. See if you can get the star scope on it. Still getting a reading on the meter. About 2 clicks. Now it's coming up. There we go. 4 foot off the ground. 4 feet off the ground, about 110 degrees, getting a reading of about 4 clicks. Yes, sir. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. No doubt about it. This is weird. Looks like an eye winking at you. Still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it's like the hollow center. Like a pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. We're picking up 4 or 5 clicks now on the meter. 3:05. We see strange strobe-like flashes. 10 degrees, horizon north. We've got 2 strange objects turning into full circles. They're moving away from us. Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. We're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal. 3:30 and the objects are still in the sky, although the one to the south looks like it's losing a little bit of altitude. It's still beaming down light to the ground. There's one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon. Light beaming down.
Finally, after 30 years, retired Colonel Charles Halt, that you heard now on that 30-year-old audio tape, the former RAF Bentwaters Deputy Base Commander, the baton of investigation passed at a Christmas party on the 27th to the 28th by the base commander, Ted Conrad, has now gone on the record only 1 year ago, on June 25th, 2009, in this formal press release statement.
I wish to make it perfectly clear that UFOs I saw were structured machines moving under intelligent control and were operating beyond the realm of anything I've ever seen before or since. I believe the objects I saw at close quarter were extraterrestrial in origin, and that the security services of both the United States and England were and have been complicit in trying to subvert the significance of what occurred at Rendlesham by use of well-practiced methods of disinformation.
Right. I agree. Clap. Okay. Finally, some official truth. With Colonel Halt in Rendlesham Forest for those 7 hours from midnight to 7 a.m. on December 28th was Staff Sergeant Monroe Nevels. And recently he talked with me at length on the record about the lights and the beams that everyone in the forest saw, including Airman First Class John Burroughs from Charlie Flight, who was not on duty but felt compelled to return to the forest. And Charles Halt let John go out, but it was late by the time Burroughs got into the forest. Here now again is Monroe Nevels.
What we saw was so fast, and it disappeared. We were in awe about, where did it go? What did it do?
And Monroe, did you see those thin beams of light come down?
Yes, I did. Those beams, when they came down, they looked like a very faint laser beam. They were pencil thin. We could see it against the black sky. When we looked out and saw those pencil thin beams, I told Colonel Halt that I believe that something is trying to tap into what we've got. I mean, what is it that they're trying to find out? Because it's obvious if it shot down to the ground, it had to be doing something, taking photos, penetrating, or trying to generate some heat to the ground, or whatever the situation was. The lights would disappear and be gone in a blink. You could blink your eye and look up and they'd be gone. And Bentwaters would announce on their radios back to us, "We see it, sir, we see it. It's over us." And then when it disappeared from their side, we immediately was able to say, "Here it is." In other words, it was like it was instantaneous from there to where we were. And at that time, the cattle were starting to get kind of edgy, you know, like they knew something was there. When we got to it, it disappeared. We couldn't figure out how it got out of those trees and where it went.
Because the trees were very tall and very close together, right?
Trees were close together, approximately 100 feet tall. So when we went out to the edge where there was a farmer's field, and Lieutenant Colonel Howe and myself were mainly the leaders, we were in front, and we looked out and saw this object that was sitting over in the farmer's field about 200 yards away. To me, it looked kind of yellowish orange, like very hot, and it looked like it was on fire, burning. And every once in a while, I would see something shoot off that looked like molten metal. Colonel Howe and I both observed that. So we jumped the fence, and as we jumped the fence, it disappeared.
Compare it to the illustration that John Burroughs did with the UK computer illustrator.
Immediately, I knew what I saw.
That it was the same?
It looked very close to it, very close. I got excited about it. There, somebody finally drew something that made sense to what I'd seen.
That same night, around 4 a.m., John Burroughs was allowed by Colonel Halt to go into the forest with Staff Sergeant Adrian Bastinza. The two were running next to each other toward lights in the farmer's field when Adrian fell to the ground on John's right, and John only remembers getting close to red-orange light and doesn't remember anything else. Later, Adrian told Burroughs, quote, "The light forced me to the ground, and I saw the red-orange light come over you," close quote. Was John Burroughs abducted twice? At 3 a.m. on December 26th, and again around 4 a.m. on December 28th by this peculiar craft. Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston described an even stranger and very different craft as a solid black triangle that he and John Burroughs approached. And here is Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston describing what he sketched and insists that he walked around for a long time in the forest.
It was a triangular craft. The fabric of the craft was black like glass, and then throughout the fabric of the craft there was some coloring varying from saucer shape to pie-shaped circles that moved around the craft. Some were red, blue, some yellow, or orange, I guess more orange. John is still with me, and I start taking observations in the notebook to coordinate the time I was there and what my actions were.
You are seeing what look like changing geometric patterns below the glass or above the glass?
Predominantly below the glass on the underside of the craft, and then occasionally moving around the upper side. It appeared that the coloring was part of the actual craft fabric. It made no sense. I've never seen anything that had that type of effect before.
Can you see through the black glass into the interior?
No, it was fully opaque. As we approached it, though, that's when I stepped off measurements of the craft. It measured approximately 9 feet long. That's 3 long steps with my stride, and approximately 6.5 feet tall. Occasionally, you would get some movement of color throughout the fabric of the craft. Sometimes a small glob that was probably 6 inches across, sometimes 12 inches across, but they were very sporadic color.
Circles that would change their size from something like 6 inches to maybe 12 inches when they moved over the surface of this dark black glass?
That is correct. It's hard to describe, but I think what stands out in my memory is the blackness of the craft. If you took an onyx stone and you had an onyx stone that measured 9 feet long and 6 feet high, that's what you would see.
Wow.
Yeah, to say the least. It was very unusual.
Were you thinking at that moment, this is not from Earth?
I knew that it was not from any form of government. I mean, no Air Force on Earth. It was beyond our capability.
Did you say to John Burroughs then, this looks like something from outer space?
I looked at John and I said, I don't know how in the hell we're going to explain this.
And do you remember what he said?
John says, we have a UFO here. I says, we have something here. I said, I got to have quiet here. I already paced it off. This is my second or third time I was walking around it, mainly in awe. Toward one side of the craft, there was markings on the craft, which were very unusual, probably 2.5, 3 feet wide. I was looking for a crew compartment or a window or something. I touched it, and the air temperature out there at the time was probably, I don't know, 34 degrees, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was very warm to the touch.
And you were feeling heat and what else?
Smoothness of the craft feels like glass, but it can't be glass. It's got to be metal, but it felt like glass. I was confused at that point because nothing in my training prepared me for what was going on. As I felt my way around the craft, I came upon the symbols that were on the craft and gave them a lot more attention, feeling each one, and then recording them in my notebook. If you had a sheet of smooth glass and you took a piece of sandpaper and you laid it on that glass, running from the glass to the sandpaper, that's how it felt.
Did you have anything come into your mind in terms of thought or image?
Well, did I feel an intelligence? Yes. But here's something that is odd. I lost track of John for like 45 minutes or so. I don't know where he was at. There was like a 45-minute gap of time there, which seemed like, I don't know, a couple minutes. I don't know what caused the distortion.
When is your very next memory of John Burroughs?
When the light on the craft started to generate to a more white, brilliant light is when I backed away from the craft. John was maybe 15 feet away, 20 feet away, standing there.
Because you were afraid of what was happening with this increasing light?
I wasn't sure what it was going to do. I don't know, explode, or the craft lifted off the forest floor, went to treetop level, and took off at an extreme rate of speed, and nothing that I know of could be gone in a blink of an eye. I had this feeling, and the feeling was that there would be a return sometime of that craft. I don't know, it was just a very odd thought.
Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to bypass a very important segment here. A few of you might have heard this on the Coast and seen it at Earth Files. This was the interview I did this spring with Rick Bobo, another sergeant who was up in the WSA tower overlooking the nuclear weapons that were stored underground. He had the ability to call a broken arrow if there was any intrusion of light down into the weapons storage area. Later, we learned Colonel Halt thought he saw beams going down into the WSA. That would have been a major, major total base alert. Bobo claims that he never saw beams come down, but he watched something like Laurie Bowen said. It reminded him of something the size of a big full moon, but it was fiery red and blue, and that it was right out of his window for 90 minutes. He said, Linda, you could have put the crosshairs of anything on it, and it didn't move except at least once and maybe twice. He saw little white lights leave this huge light and go right down into Rendlesham. Twice, Sergeant Rick Bobo called Central Security Control, first to report this gigantic light that is out there, and they said, don't worry, we have it covered. When he calls in again to tell them that there are white lights now leaving this big red-blue light, and they're going down into the forest, he calls to report that. Central Security Control says, don't worry, we've got it covered. The cover is Colonel Halt and the men out in the forest stumbling around for 7 hours, not knowing what's going on. And here is another disturbing fact to Sergeant Bobo, to me, and I would think you in an audience. Until I interviewed Rick Bobo this spring, not a single person in 30 years had ever talked to the man who was in the weapons storage area tower above the nuclear weapons. I'm hurrying through this section. So, by the time the sun came up, and Adrian Bustinza on the ground in this illustration has gotten up, and Burroughs has gotten up, and they've talked. That's all Bustinza ever told John. I was running, the light forced me to the ground. I saw this red-orange light come over you. End of story. But it has haunted John Burroughs so much over the last 30 years that he has never slept well. Jim Penniston has never slept well. They both wake up in something that would be like repeating dreams, and sometimes with terror and sweating. And it was in 2008 that John Burroughs called me and said, could you help me find somebody who could work with me in hypnosis? I really want to remember what happened to me. And we have been working at this over time, and tonight I'm just going to share 2 small pieces that'll give you just a flavor of what is inside of this man that he still can't break through to full memory. The person doing the hypnotherapy is Melinda Vale, who specializes in post-traumatic shock syndrome in young people, and she agreed to help. I hope that John could break through to full memory for his sake. And here are 2 sort of echoes of what Sergeant Monroe Neville said with Lieutenant England when they went out for the first check, what you heard in the recorded tape of Colonel Holt talking about the eye with the dark center that seemed to be blinking. Here now is a brief excerpt from October 2008 in Phoenix in a hypnosis session with John Burroughs.
Oh, God.
What?
It won't let me.
It won't let you go back there?
Every time I go, it gets strong. Oh, and it wants to pull me towards it.
Okay, sweetheart.
And when I think it comes towards me, and then it pulls me towards it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's strong.
Okay, it's okay. It's okay.
Oh, what is it doing? What are they?
It's all right.
Oh, are they coming at me?
It's lights that are coming at you?
Little ones.
Little ones, okay. What does it feel like when they come at you?
It just startles me.
Okay.
Oh, God.
You're all right. I've got you. What else do you see there?
Just huge. Now it's getting bigger and bigger, like milky white object or substance that just keeps going up, down, wider, smaller. Then there's an eye or something behind it.
And it's interfering with your ability to go back in time?
Every time you ask me to go back, the smaller objects or the thing appear, and it gets stronger. Now there's a hole between it, like a hole's opening up.
Do you see anything in the hole?
No. Wow.
What does the hole mean to you?
I don't know.
John Burroughs was born in Bloomington, Illinois in 1960 and joined the U.S. Air Force right after high school graduation. He received orders to go to RAF Bentwaters, England, and arrived in July 1979, about 18 months before the highly strange Rendlesham Forest encounters. John remained in the Air Force until his retirement in 2005 as a sergeant. Right from the beginning, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston saw what they could not explain, and something happened to their minds. either in the forest, in military interrogations later on, or both. The results have been blank or confused memories, troubled sleep, dreams, and nightmares. The two men were right next to each other in the forest, but they do not remember the same details. Here now is my friend, colleague, and former RAF Bentwaters Airman First Class, John Burroughs. Yes, we will. Yes, we will. Don't worry.
Thank you. I'd like to thank MUFON for inviting us here tonight to speak, and I especially like to take a moment and thank Linda Howe. As you can see, what she's covered is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we have spent hours and hours working on this, and she has by far done the most work on this, so I'd like to give her a quick hand.
Thank you.
About a year ago, I set out on a mission, and the mission was to try to get everybody, or as many people as I could, together sometime this year, preferably closer to December or in December, to do a reunion. So I started contacting people. As far as the reunion goes, I'm still not sure if we'll be able to put it together, but I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people that were involved in this incident, and I've been able to talk to them in more detail than I've ever been able to do before. And one of the things that I found out while I was in the process of contacting people was that there possibly was an investigation going on between the night of our incident and when Colonel Howe went out into the woods. And after I received this information in May, I was able to meet with Colonel Howe in Washington, D.C. And I brought this up to him, and Linda was there, and he got this very puzzled look on his face when I brought it up to him that possibly that there was some kind of investigation going on and he wasn't aware of. And his comment to me was, that would explain a lot of unanswered questions I have. From that point, I went forward and contacted Monroe Nevels. And Monroe is an interesting individual because he was, not only was he out there, but he was out there with the Geiger counter, and he's on the tape. And I hope if you haven't had a chance to listen to Colonel Howe's tape, you take a moment when you have a chance to listen to it. Because if you think about this, this is only one of the few real-time pieces of evidence that's out there, period, for UFOs. And what I mean by that, you have an actual recording of people talking about an encounter as it was going on. And obviously, what do you think, folks? A lighthouse? Meteors? Planets? I mean, it's absurd. And then you take it a step further and you look at the radiation readings, which Linda's done. But when I contacted Monroe, what I learned from him was that there was an investigation going on and that some of the senior leadership on the base was involved in this. What I didn't know until after Linda interviewed him was the fact that he confirmed once again that somebody may have been taken up into a craft. And the funny thing is, when I first met Linda, she was coming after me along with Chuck DeCaro trying to confirm whether or not I actually had something happen to me in that matter. What I will say is this, folks, we had an encounter with something. To this day, I'm not sure what it was. I can tell you it's something that I've never seen before or after. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not something that I can explain to you on real terms of an aircraft or something that we have flying around in the skies to this day. And I can promise you this, that with Linda's help, we're going to continue this. This is an ongoing investigation. We're in the process of going to be contacting and talking to several more people involved in this. And there will be continuing updates on Earth Files. And I have a Facebook site that's called Justice for the Men and Women 81st Security Police Squadron. Jim Penniston's on it. I'm on it. We're working on getting Colonel Howe on it. And what we'd like to see is justice for all of us. We'd like an answer from the government. Because after all of us had raised our right hands, went out there, sworn to do a duty to protect this country. We were out there working, doing our job. And as you can see, we've been let down. We've been let down by our leadership and our government.
And for those of you who heard my interview with Colonel Holt in August about a year ago, he was extremely angry. I did not put all of his anger on Coast or in any public capacity. And what he was angry about is he told me in no uncertain terms, I was left out of the chain of command. The story went beyond me. Well, now, a year later, we now know from Monroe Nevels that that was absolutely true. And next Thursday, on the 29th, the first full hour of my 3 hours on Coast is going to be much more from Monroe Nevels talking about the situation. And one of the implications that continues to grow is that the base commander, Ted Conrad, which no one heard much about until now, he must have started putting in phone calls to people in Ramstein, let alone saying that he wanted Lieutenant Bruce England and Monroe Nevels to put in motion this top secret private investigation. And John, when you look back to what your assignment was on that very next day, you've been out in that forest twice, you know that you have been through drama, you end up getting assigned to the East Gate. What did you see happen that would reinforce this idea that somebody had something in the works going out into Rendlesham?
Well, even prior to that, Sunday night when I was up on the base, a C-5 came in, and it was taken back to a restricted area over by the weapons storage area, and there was a crew unloaded with helicopters. When I reported back to duty on Monday, which would have been my first swing ship back to duty, I was placed at the East Gate. When I was placed there, I was told I was being put out there because of my prior experience, what had gone on in the woods, and that there wasn't some type of an investigation going on in the woods, and that if I saw anything that was out of the normal or strange, don't call it in on the radio, pick up the phone and let them know what was going on. They didn't want it over the radio. And on Tuesday night, on my second night on the gate, right around dusk, a helicopter lifted a crate out of the woods and took it over onto the Woodbridge Fight Line.
And in my discussion with the radiation specialist in Texas, he said that if anybody had gathered soil, plants, and from the trees, that Monroe Nevels said that right at waist level, as if something had spun, and that he was getting the 7 milliroentgens off of every single tree where he could see a scorch mark. The assumption is that there were people who went out and took soil, who took from the tripod, who took something from those trees, and that would be able to tell higher authority at least what was the chemistry that was giving off the gamma radiation. That might have been part of what was lifted off.
Correct.
Now, Britain's Lord Hill Norton was a 5-star admiral, chief of the UK Defence Staff, chairman of the NATO Military Command, and said about RAF Bantwaters, quote, "It had to be of defense significance. No matter how much policy of denial there was, that's what he was saying." And former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher told journalist Georgina Bruni, quote, "Yes, Bantwaters happened, but we can't tell the people," close quote. And that was the title of Georgina's 2000 book. What do you think Margaret Thatcher and the various need-to-know agencies in the United Kingdom and the United States know about what happened in Rendlesham Forest up the chain of command to General Baisley, General Gabriel, perhaps the NSA, CIA, that the rest of us after 30 years still have not been told?
Well, it's clear that they did conduct an investigation. That Chuck DeCaro, when he did his piece, said that he had an agency come over and review the tape. What it appears to be, possibly at least, is the fact that we had nuclear weapons at the base. We had unexplained phenomena flying around the base. And as you'll see in a couple minutes, another individual said they were completely caught off guard by this, and how are they going to explain that they're unable to defend an air base at the time was the largest tech fighter wing in the Air Force that had housed nuclear weapons. So they were definitely in a dilemma on dealing with the fact that how are they going to explain it. The second problem I believe that was there was, as Lord Hill Norton said, either we were hallucinating or it was of defense significance. Well, as you can see from numerous witnesses, we weren't hallucinating. So we had an incident. How does the Air Force deal with that? And to this day, if you follow this incident or look into this incident, the Air Force has had very little to say about it, which is not normal. They have not commented. Very few people in the upper chain have ever said anything negative about it. And the only thing that the Air Force has ever come out and said on the record was they stood by Colonel Halt's memo. So I believe in a lot of ways, at least at the beginning and at the level of the base command, they had no idea what they were dealing with and how were they going to explain it. Yeah. We got about a minute. Thanks.
Stay.
All right.
And that RAF Bentwaters phenomena of December 1980 did not end on the 28th. 12 days later, on January 9th, 1981, Colonel Holt was back out in Rendlesham Forest along with his superior officers, Colonel Ted Conrad and Colonel Gordon Williams, to see another reported UFO over the Eastgate Forest. But none of them ever officially reported ongoing light and craft phenomena. However, a U.S. Air Force security man who was there detailed for me what happened at the Eastgate the night of January 9th going into the 10th of 1981. His name is Steve LaPlume. He was born in Massachusetts on July 14th, 1962. Right after high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and arrived at RAF Bentwaters in mid-September of 1980. In December, he had been doing shift reliefs and remembers being in the day room soon after Christmas when there was talk about airmen chased by a UFO in Rendlesham Forest. And then, on the night of January 9th, he was there at the East Gate with Senior Airman Wendell Palmer. First, LaPlume and Palmer watched a light moving up and down in the sky. It was like a sewing machine needle moving that fast. They had never seen anything like it, could not understand the aerodynamics, and Steve said, you would think anything inside of something moving like this would be crushed. They called security control, and to their shock, Colonel Gordon Williams, head of the 81st Tactical Wing, Base Commander Ted Conrad, and Deputy Base Commander Charles Holt all showed up with cameras to photograph the UFO that had returned to Rendlesham Forest. Colonel Conrad even had his wife and children with him. It implies that they must have been told something about whatever was there was not threatening. That is an assumption. LaPlume said, quote, they all came back about 45 minutes later and gave no indication that they saw anything. They posted me on that Eastgate all night long and told me to report if I saw anything else, and then they all left. At the Eastgate then, LaPlume and Wendell Palmer see something come over them that they estimated to be 1 or 2 football fields long, shaped like a cigar. And that when it got over them at about 1,000 feet, and they could not hear a noise, in fact, it was so eerily silent, it scared them. Here now is Steve LaPlume.
This craft was maybe about 1,000 feet off the ground, and it just seemed like a huge cigar shape. And when it got over us, I remember seeing some lights underneath. I remember seeing it was a structure, and there was like a square hatch-looking thing. I was pretty sure I was looking at the UFO. And then the craft started moving towards the right, went up in elevation, went up in clouds, and turned into one of the stars, and that was the last we saw of it. Palmer looked at me, and I looked at him, and he said, do you want to call that in? And I said, hell no, and he said, okay. And we never really talked about it again after that. We never told anybody about it, because we didn't want the ridicule and all the other BS that was going to come down on us.
How long do you think that you and Palmer watched it close above you?
Well, I'd say from the time it took when I realized it wasn't an airplane and it was over the forest to the time it got to where we were standing and over our heads would have taken maybe 20 seconds. And then when it was over our heads, I don't think it was over our heads 10 seconds.
So at least a 30-second sighting, and then what happened to it?
And then it moved off towards our right and went up into the sky slowly, maybe about a 25-degree angle, climbed in elevation, and eventually went from something that looked like a craft to something that looked like a star and faded in with the stars. This was, not of this earth, or nothing that I'd seen could come close to what this craft was doing.
And then what are the implications
Yep. Here we are 30 years later. We still have no clear answers of what's going on. I mean, when you have crafts flying over nuclear weapons storage areas and nobody seems to have a grip on what they are, you'd think that'd be kind of important.
And why did the governments remain so silent?
I think just utter fear that they couldn't. What are they going to tell the people? Something's flying over our nukes and we have no control over it?
Good question. In 1997, Jim Peniston gave me permission to share some of his December 26 Rendlesham Forest experiences in my third book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness. After his and John Burroughs' encounter with the lights and craft, Sergeant Peniston told me that he received a call to report the first week of February 1981, that's about a month later, to the orderly room at the 81st Security Police Squadron at RAF Bentwaters. There, Major Malcolm Zickler ordered Peniston to report to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations for a meeting to tell his story to an AFOSI special agent and a U.S. Air Force major, and Jim thought a man was also there from the United States National Security Agency. Back in 1997, Peniston told me that he deliberately had never told anyone, anywhere, about reaching out to touch the symbols on the glassy surface or the glowing, strange lights that were over the surface of this craft, and never told anybody about having received information in his mind when he touched those symbols. But the men in front of him in this AFOSI interrogation room, they seemed to know everything about what had happened to Sergeant Peniston. And they told him that they knew he was not telling the truth, and that they demanded that he sign a release so that he could be given sodium pentothal, which is a barbiturate that induces unconsciousness smoothly and rapidly and has been called truth serum when used with hypnosis. After that Bentwaters sodium pentothal hypnosis session, which went on from around 1 o'clock to about 4 or 5 o'clock that afternoon, when it was over, no one told Jim Peniston what he had said. Finally, 14 years after that, in 1994, Jim Peniston underwent hypnosis on his own with a hypnotherapist to see if he could penetrate more details about the haunting dreams that he was having. And his worry that the military sodium pentothal hypnosis might have been done to purposely erase part of Peniston's memory or add something. I was given an audio cassette of that 1994 session to transcribe. The transcription is included in my 1998 book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness. Jim Peniston's Bentwaters interrogators ask about the glowing lights and the craft that he had earlier refused to describe. Quoting from the September 10th, 1994 Peniston hypnosis. They are asking me if I see binary code. I see the binary code. They are time travelers. They are us. How far in the future? A long time, a very, very long time. What do they need? Not sure, but it has to do with chromosomes or something like that. How did they get it? They take it from where? From the other people's bodies. They, the time travelers, were interrupted in Rendlesham Forest. They are having problems. The odds are against them. You touched the symbols and you set off a program? Yes, the craft was repairing itself. All they wanted was a place to stay while it repaired itself. And by touching the symbols, you disrupted the repair program. I activated a binary code. And the two government men want to know why. They ask me if I have ever had any other encounters with the lights and time travelers before. I haven't. Are they using us something like breeding stock? No, like Band-Aids. Do they ever take fetuses? If it is tasks, they do. There are different ships for tasking. The government agents know about this. That's why they want to contain the situation. They see you as requiring damage control. Yes, they see me and John Burroughs, and they're worried about Colonel Holt. They know all about us. What are the intelligence agents going to do with you? They tell me when I was at the East Gate with John, they have 5 different stories to tell. It's important to scramble dates, which confuses and undermines consistency of eyewitness testimony, so no credibility with public and the media. They're going to give me a warning. They tell me that I will hurt the world. It will breach national security and can destroy the system, cause wars, chaos in the streets. That's why it's important to keep it quiet. But it doesn't make any difference if I talk about the story because it's too unbelievable, close quote. When Sergeant Peniston placed his hand on the craft's engraved symbols, he thinks he activated technology that sent light containing binary code communication into his mind from time travelers and their time machine craft. Time travel is a serious subject in modern physics. Mathematical theory says that if matter approaches the speed of light, time appears to slow down to an external observer. If you were the light speed matter, you would notice no difference in time. The closer you got to the speed of light, the slower time would go. If you reached the speed of light, time would stop. Then, if you could exceed the speed of light, time would reverse, but only to the outside observer. You, the traveler going faster than light, would have no reference point for time change until you return to your physical starting point and slowed back down to normal speeds. Then you would have lived that famous limerick from the time of Einstein. There once was a lady named Bright who traveled much faster than light. She departed one day in a relative way and came home the previous night. There is a paradox in Peniston's recall of the telepathic transmission from the glowing craft. The implication is that the time travelers are human descendants from a place 40,000 years in the future where humanity is dying out. Time machine craft are sent back through time to harvest genetic material from our present Earth life in order to help a future civilization survive. The explanation given for traveling thousands of years into the past was to avoid affecting the time traveler's own future timeline in some dangerous, uncontrollable way. But moving backwards in time to a distant past to survive is changing their future. Perhaps the paradox is a translation problem in which we humans lack the language and understanding of a different cosmology than we have discovered. Fans of Star Trek and Star Wars and other science fiction are accustomed to plots that include allies or enemies that use time travel for transportation, to fight wars, to change destinies, and to even gain immortality. Whether the different lights, beams, craft, and symbols in Rendlesham Forest belong to time travelers or extraterrestrial biological entities from inside this universe, or non-human entities from parallel universes or other dimensions. Why is the truth suppressed? Why can't governments tell their citizens that humans are not alone in the universe? What facts about other intelligences interacting with Earth do government insiders know and consider so dangerous that they hide those facts for decades under a policy of denial in the interests of national security? If national security is built on lies and deceptions, it is no one's security. It is social imprisonment by illusion. Those distorting reality are using lies to control the public and media while perpetuating their power. However, the 1980 high strangeness in Rendlesham Forest has never rested easily in the minds of those who were actually there. Perhaps like human time-release capsules, John Burroughs, Jim Peniston, Colonel Howe, and others, Monroe Neville's, have embedded within them pieces of truth about an incomprehensible future. or pieces of lies that keep humans corralled by illusions. Either way, whatever penetrated the Rendlesham Forest in December of 1980 is still reverberating 30 years later in 2010 with so much power that John Burroughs cannot forget the haunting, seemingly telepathic lights and the question, what is their source? What if the key to the Rendlesham Forest mystery is a tangle of past, present, and future timelines, a knot? If the knot is untied by advanced technologies, what happens to past, present, and future? Are we unconsciously in the ultimate paradox? We are they are us, life on Earth is not guaranteed, but the mysterious telepathic lights and their makers are using us to survive. And does our ignorance of them and the timeline knot allow the manipulation of us by time travelers? If we humans became conscious of the time manipulation efforts, would our consciousness change the future to survival or to extinction? Does the UFO phenomenon keep us dumb and blind to prevent our interference in their efforts to unravel past, present, and future? I thank you from me and John Burroughs.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, John. Thank you all. Again, sorry to be the bad guy. We always just do have to cut it short. I apologize. We're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We will then conclude.